Hello, thank you for joining our Signal webinar series. I'm Kimberly Underwood, Senior Editor at AXIA International Signal Magazine. I'd like to welcome you today to our webinar entitled Real-World Lessons from Large-Scale Cloud Migrations, which is sponsored by Red Seal. Red Seal is a cloud security solutions company headquartered in San Jose, California. They've put together an outstanding panel of 4 cyber and cloud computing experts to speak to us today. And the panelists are quite accomplished experts in their fields, so don't be fooled by their modesty. First, we have Wayne Lloyd, who is Red Seal's Federal Chief Technology Officer. Wayne has more than 30 years' experience in information technology, focusing on computer and network security, advanced threat analysis, intrusion detection and operations, policy and compliance, and vulnerability risk assessments. In his role, Wayne supports DoD, the intelligence community, and federal agencies to deliver security and network engineering solutions. Also from Red Seal, we have Dr. Mike Lloyd, who is the company's CTO. Dr. Lloyd has more than 25 years of experience in the modeling and control of fast-moving complex systems. He holds 21 patents in security, network assessment, and dynamic network control technologies. Before joining Red Seal, Mike was the CTO at Route Science Technologies, which was acquired by Avaya, where he pioneered self-optimizing networks. Mike served as principal architect at Cisco on the technology used to overlay multi-protocol label switching, or MPLS, to create virtual private networks VPN capability across server provider backbones. Mike holds degrees in mathematics from Trinity College in Dublin, and a PhD in stochastic epidemic modeling from Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, Scotland. Next, we have Adam Gert, a computer scientist, and he has focused on risk and compliance solutions for some of the largest and most complex networks in the industry. Adam is the president of ClockSpring, which is based in Oxon Hill, Maryland, and he founded the company about 6 years ago. They specialize in creating automation systems that provide scalable, fast, and extremely flexible low-code integration capability to connect enterprise systems. Prior to founding ClockSpring, Adam worked for Booz Allen Hamilton as an integration engineer, at SecureForce as a governance, risk management, and compliance expert, and at BAA Systems, where he was a lead engineer for network management. I'd also like to introduce you to Eric Lawrence, a cyber automation engineer and cybersecurity analyst at Booz Allen. Among other clients, Eric supports the Naval Sea Systems Command, providing cyber tool deployment, integration, and maintenance. Before joining Booz Allen, Eric was a Marine, serving in the Marine Corps Cryptologic Support Battalion, Bravo Company, as a signals intelligence analyst at Fort Meade. Upon leaving the military, he supported digital network target discovery efforts at NSA. Welcome, gentlemen. And we're almost ready to get started. I'd like to encourage our audience members to ask questions during the panel's discussion. And to do that, you'll use the Ask a Question box on your webinar console. I'd also like to point you to the Resources tab, which has some more information about Red Seal that you can download. And please visit their website at redseal.net. We'll also have 2 quick poll questions about cloud migration that will pop up on your screen. So if you could kindly respond, thanks very much. And with that, over to you, Wayne.
Awesome. Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. Thanks for your time today. So first question we have, Eric and Adam, you each come from different organizations. How different do you think your cloud adoption has been given the unique or different focuses of your agencies and department? Adam, we'll start off with you. Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I'd say it's going to be quite different just because of the different agencies. So we're on the civilian federal side. We are, I'd say, 30 to 40% done with the migration. We're in the hybrid model. It's never going to be a full model because you're never going to be able to move a hospital to the cloud. So we're always going to have on-prem and cloud infrastructure. But we are well on our way to moving in both Azure and AWS.
Excellent. Eric, over in the Department of Defense, what are you seeing?
Unfortunately, sometimes I see that it's kind of a slow trudge to get from legacy networks over to cloud. Private industry tends to be a little more forward-leaning and quicker to develop the policies and practices for this, where DoD entities may be a little bit slower at doing this. More specifically for me, I support a DoD entity that is beholden to DISA. So as a contractor providing a service to a customer, I'm already expected to be that expert. And so fulfilling their requirements, making sure that the customer's vision is executed appropriately, sometimes this can be an uphill battle when they're slow to adopt new technologies, especially DoD elements and more specifically anything that it relates to the government. So oftentimes the government is slow to establish those policies, how those technologies should be implemented and used. Then there are other concerns such as sensitivity of data. There are multiple levels of assurance and integrity that have to come into play. And all of those things kind of compound and make it a little more difficult and make it seem like it's this giant of a task to accomplish. So unfortunately, it's been slow from my view. I do kind of have a multifaceted view, seeing it from the DoD side and seeing it from private industry, since I am a service provider. So in the end, my experience has just been a very slow progression, simply due to the number of hurdles that have to be jumped over and the multiple layers of approval and policy creation.
Gotcha. And Dr.
That
Mike,
sort of reminds me of the thing about, can't we pick up this house and move it 2 feet to the right? Well, it's only 2 feet. How hard could that be? Well, when the house is really big and heavy, like both of your organizations, that's actually a serious challenge.
Yeah, and Dr. Mike, you have the pleasure of seeing, both the public sector, the federal government challenges, and also our commercial customers' challenges. What is your opinion on this of how cloud adoption is going?
Yeah, I think Adam hit a great point early on about it's not a pure cloud future, right? There are things that you can't put in the cloud. You can't put a hospital in the cloud. Great example. It's quite hard to put a missile in the cloud, right? So there are a bunch of physical resources that will not easily move out. So we're trying to get IT systems, like say the conferencing system we're using right now. It's a good example of how cloud can take over quite a lot of workload, but it can never take over everything. And especially in the government sector, in all the various disciplines that you have within the government, we find there's a lot of stuff that is never going to go cloud because, for example, it's a hospital, right? You can't virtually treat people. You have to actually get drugs into their arms. And so there has to be some IT around that because everything now has a digital component. So what this means is we have a hybrid future. Now, as I think we'll unpack a little bit in the course of this conversation, right? A hybrid future sounds nice, right? Hybrid cars work pretty well. But from a security point of view, it's really quite a bit of a challenge to run hybrid networks that are part migrated to the cloud and part what we tend to call legacy or on-prem, right? It's difficult because these are different. And we can unpack some of what the differences are. But the difficulty in security is anytime you have two things, that's harder to secure than one, two different things, because they have different rules, right? Security is often a game of mistakes, right? Bad guys exploit weaknesses and defensive gaps that come ultimately from mistakes. And the more different ways we have to do things, the more mistakes we're going to make. If we had to fill in all our forms in Greek and in German, then we'd make more mistakes having to fill in these two sets of forms than if we just have to fill it all in English. So, I'm not saying there that cloud is inherently the problem, but hybrid can be a really particular problem. And I think both of your experiences, Adam and Eric, have gotten into some of that about, it feels like a transition where you're halfway to something, except no, that feeling of having 1 foot in each of two boats, that's our long-term future now for a lot of these organizations. And it's difficult to have 1 foot in each of two boats.
Yep. Actually, to add on to that a little bit, there's also SaaS, right? So we're talking about maybe just, lift and shift from on-prem to an AWS data center. But we've also got like ServiceNow has a SaaS offering, or Office 365 or M365. You can outsource your Exchange because who wants to maintain an Exchange server anymore? But now you've got the data governance issues as well, that you're no longer moving it into kind of a VPC or an enclave that you still mostly control to like completely outsourcing it to a third party and just understanding what data is going, how secure is it, what type of controls do those service providers have in place to maintain the integrity and availability and confidentiality of your data.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point, and that's bringing out that cloud migration isn't even one thing, right? I was talking about it as well. There's your legacy on-prem, and then there's cloud. And your point is even cloud comes in multiple different flavors, which makes that security problem worse and worse because there's more than one kind of cloud. We're not just saying more than one cloud vendor. There's certainly got that. We've got our Azure, we've got our AWS, we got our Google, and we got the GovCloud representations of all these various things. So you've got all the different vendor diversity, but then you've also got differences in how cloud can be used. Now that wasn't our main theme for starting this one. We do want to talk about the zero trust aspects as well. But to dwell on this for a second, just in case folks aren't as familiar with all of the flavors of cloud, there's this confusing acronym soup where you've got your infrastructure as a service, your platform as a service, your software as a service, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. And the best explanation I've encountered to help people think about that is this is like how you get your pizza. I don't know if people are familiar with the pizza as a service conversation, right? But the idea is if you want to get a pizza, you've got a whole bunch of choices. You can make your own. You can buy your own ingredients at the grocery store, bring it home, heat up your oven, put your pizza in there, take it out. Now you're responsible for laying the table, having all the tableware, tidying up afterwards, washing up all the dishes, right? You can take over the entire pizza experience, or you can choose pre-made from the supermarket, bring it home and bake it yourself. Now you're responsible for a bit less. Or you can have a pizza delivered. Now you're still responsible for tidying up afterwards, but you have less work to do when the hot pizza shows up at your front door. Or you can go all the way out to going to a restaurant and buying a pizza there, and they even wash up the dishes, right? And so you can have pizza in any of these forms, and IT is like that pizza, right? You can have your IT done in any of these ways. You can do it 100% yourself, or you can outsource more and more of it, give somebody else responsibility. That brings about that shared responsibility model, right? And that's something that people find hard to think through in cloud about, well, wait a second, which are the parts that I'm responsible for and which are the parts that the other organization is responsible for? You clearly have a security disaster if you misunderstand that. If you think you're getting restaurant pizza where you're not responsible for anything, and in fact your cloud provider is giving you delivery or take home and bake, right? There's a gap there in the responsibility. And that's your, a colorful way, I think, Adam, of talking about your same point of the data governance model, the cloud governance model, right? This is the more formal language for the same point, saying, you have to clearly understand where your responsibility stops. And it's not like there's even one answer in cloud, in the same way there's not one answer of how you get a pizza. You've got a variety of choices. And just to flip now to the cynical security point of view, and then the question is, which of these is the safe one? Well, that's like saying, which way of getting pizza guarantees you won't get food poisoning? There aren't any, right? The pizza experience can go wrong in any of these forms. And so the security problem never goes away, right? You can still have a problem with your pizza. It's just a different issue about who you blame if you made it versus if you went to a restaurant. But it's still ultimately you who gets the food poisoning. So from a government point of view, you have to think through as you go to cloud, which responsibility model, which pizza responsibility model are you using, and how are you making sure you're taking care of your part of it? And that, it's a colorful analogy, but the whole point is it's complicated, right? You have to be able to think all these things through in terms of the kind of cloud service you're using. And that, weighing back to the question you asked, right? That's where I find organizations struggle. A lot gets lost because people haven't clearly thought through what they are responsible for, where their job ends, and where the cloud provider begins.
Yeah, those are great points, Dr. Mike. A lot of people do forget to take into account. It really comes down to the basics, in my personal opinion, of what can be moved to the cloud, what do we want to move to the cloud, what can't we move to the cloud, and what aren't we allowed to move to the cloud. And that comes up. For Adam and Eric, they're representing two very large government entities at different ends of the spectrum. We go to the president's last executive order dated May 12th, 2021, which compels federal agencies to move to zero trust architectures and adoption of cloud services. And this is really meant to modernize departmental agency and IT infrastructures and their security technologies that protect them. But what does zero trust really mean, Dr. Mike?
Yeah, This is a great question, and it's a current question for a lot of organizations, because we've got presidential directives saying you got to go do this zero trust thing, and you hear a lot of buzz and a lot of hype, but we find a lot of organizations are quite unclear on what zero trust really means. It seems, those are English words, zero trust, but let's think about it for a second. Here I am, I'm sitting on a chair. Most people listening to this webinar are probably sitting on chairs. Did you audit that chair before you sat on it? No, you just sat on it. It's a chair, right? But that means you trusted it, right? We all use trust every day. If you get into a car, you trust that the car is not going to let you down, right? So trust is fundamental to operation. So zero trust is a very strange thing to say. And I think, I shouldn't whine about it. It is the name in the industry, and it's the name that the NIST guidance has picked up, and OMB has picked it up, and the presidential directive has picked it up. And I do think it's a legitimate movement, right? There's a legitimate thought process there. The label is what confuses people, because ultimately you can't operate with no trust of anything, right? I'm trusting this laptop in front of me isn't going to catch fire as we sit here in the middle of this webinar. So what does it really mean? It's really defined against the way we used to think. If you like, it's a negative definition. In my spare time, I'm a pilot. And one of the things you learn in aviation is most innovations in aviation technology, they end up with a name that defines it as not being the previous thing. It's defined as not that thing, but previously. And I think that happens in a lot of military acronyms, a lot of government acronyms. And I think zero trust is one of those. It's really reflecting, please don't think about security the old way, the medieval castle on a hill idea of we're going to build a stout moat, and we're going to have a drawbridge, and we have big thick walls, and then we'll put all the good stuff inside the castle. That's the old way of thinking. And notice we don't live in medieval castles anymore, right? We live in modern cities, and we don't have walls around our cities anymore. Why not? Is it the world such a peaceful place? No, unfortunately, it's the opposite. The weapons got too good, right? The weapons got too good at knocking down castle walls, and so we just didn't find that to be an effective defense anymore. And so in the same way that medieval military thinkers had to abandon the big walled castle and had to think about new ways of building forts, new ways of building defenses, that's really what zero trust is. It's saying, don't depend on the old-fashioned network perimeter, sort of the moat around the castle, and just assume everything inside the castle can be trusted, everything outside cannot. That's a very 1980s, 1990s way of thinking about security. And it's very slow, just like Adam and Eric are talking about. It's very hard to change people's mindset on this. But so what's the alternative? If zero trust couldn't possibly mean have no trust in anything ever, what it really means is make sure you've authorized at the four main levels, right? What are the four things you have to think about when you run an IT system? And they're always the same things. You've got to think about who are your users, what devices are they using, over what network, to what application. So users, devices, network, and application. Now that's four things. I don't know about you, but if I'm going to go to the store and try and buy stuff, as soon as I get to three things, I have to write a shopping list, right? Human short-term memory starts to get exhausted once we say more than three things. And I just said four, right? And now they all kind of make sense, right? It is this chain of four things that are fundamental to security authorization, right? Who is the user? Are they using a trusted device? Are they going over the right network? And are they getting to the right application? Those are the four things. But one of the reasons I think people find zero trust such a confusing conversation is because that exceeds the shopping list limit in people's heads, right? It's hard to keep track of all four of these things. And so what I see organizations tending to do is latch on to the one they're most comfortable with on this list and just say, that's zero trust, right? I see a lot of people who, for example, focus just on, well, it can't be a castle wall anymore. It has to be about identity. They say it's all just, if I just have the right identity store, if I just have good LDAP, right? If I can just get my CAC card system working perfectly, if I just know the identity of the user, then everything is taken care of. And this is just not true. That's not what zero trust says. Zero trust says you've got to think through all four pieces. You have to be able to make sure the user is authenticated, make sure they have the role that you think they still have, because personnel turnover is a real thing. Make sure they're on a device that's trusted, because in a pandemic world, we've all started using a much more diverse set of devices as we work from wherever we happen to be, just like we are in this webinar. You've got to think about the network you're moving over. That's the inconvenient part that never quite goes away, that the fabric in between needs to be separated and segmented to stop threats from propagating. And then make sure the application is actually authenticating the users. And the big mistake is to lose the plot of these 4 pieces and just focus on one. As I say, the most common I see is just focusing all the energy on zero trust means I need to do identity better. No, it doesn't. It means you've got to do all 4 of these better. That's the key.
Very informative. Eric, Adam, why don't we go with you, Eric? You have anything to add to that concerning zero trust and the executive order from the president? Yep, you're on mute.
Yeah, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure Dr. Mike covered that very wholesomely. I will say the pitfalls that he mentioned near the end is getting one of those facets wrong. We get people who are experts in one of those areas, and they get pigeonholed saying, "Oh, my job is the most important, and this has to be right, or none of these are right." And that is sometimes the case, sometimes not the case. But as Dr. Mike alluded to, yes, you need to perfect all 4 of these individual disciplines in order for this to work properly. I just want to reinforce that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like the spin you put in it about people as well, right? Because people are often expert in one of these things,
Absolutely.
and then they just think, now I understand what the zero trust mantra is. It's my specialty, and it really doesn't work that way, right? This is a program level initiative where you have to integrate across disciplines, and those are nice shiny words, but it's really hard to do in practice.
Adam, I mean, you have a pretty big challenge there. Working in the hospital field, and people kind of really have to trust that those people that you work with are doing the right things and know what they're doing. How is your organization looking at zero trust?
I think it's going to go back to pretty much what Dr. Mike was saying, right? Identity is kind of the low-hanging fruit. I'll say it's the easiest one because I'll just try on MFA, right? Hey, I've got my PIV, right? That's certificate authentication. I've got my PIN. It's something I have. It's something I know. It's relatively easy. But then you have, I'll call them legacy technology, right? That doesn't support MFA, or it's password only, or it doesn't, maybe it won't integrate with Okta. There's no OpenID support. There's no SAML. And you have to go back to legacy username and password. So even the easy one is not easy because you're dealing with an organization that's been around for, 20, 30, 50 years, right? The network I run, or I'm a part of, was stood up in the 80s. It's a very old network, and I know none of those components are still there, but you can still see some of the remnants of it because it's a 24/7 environment, right? You can't take a hospital down for maintenance. You've got to you hot patch it. You run your secondary servers. There's no easy lift and shift to say.
Yeah. No, that's excellent. In fact, maybe that's a good way to bring out an example, right? I think hospitals are really a good example of a lot of the challenges, right? And so I think that really helps clarify a lot of the issues. If you think about it as just like you brought out, Adam, it's a lot of people end up thinking, oh, it's just MFA. If we just do MFA, we're done, and it really isn't that way. Let's think about that in a hospital context, right? You have IT systems for doctors, and then you have guest patient Wi-Fi, right? These are 2 networks. Well, even if you did all the MFA in the world to make sure that when people came onto the network, you knew who they were. And even if you correctly put them so that the patients all ended up on the patient guest Wi-Fi and the doctors all ended up on the doctor Wi-Fi, okay, that would be an achievement in itself. But now what happens on the guest Wi-Fi? It's supposed to be the case that the guest Wi-Fi only lets you out to the internet so you can surf while you're bored waiting for the operation or whatever it is you're doing, right? But you're not supposed to be able to reach across and tinker with the medical machinery. That's supposed to be a segmented network. Okay, fine, but is it, right? So zero trust is not simply, oh, we need to get the user authentication correct. It certainly includes that, right? There's a lot more emphasis. And so that's where a lot of the heat and light has come out, because people have realized, look, we have to actually authenticate people all the damn time, not just as they come in across the moat of the castle, right? So identity has a key role to play. But even if you did the best job of identity in the world, and you think about a hospital, if you had all the identities nailed down for all of the patients and all of the doctors, and then you connected them to a network that let the guest Wi-Fi tinker with the medical machinery, you have a disaster. And why do I bring up that example? This is a civilian situation, not a government or VA situation, but I've really seen hospitals that look like that, where, sure, they have guest Wi-Fi, except it's wide open access to all the rest of the hospital. Right? It's an easy mistake to make, and it's fundamentally a violation of this architecture, a violation of what the presidential directive is telling people to do. Right? The president did not say, "Go thou and do MFA," right? We need to harden our infrastructures using a zero trust mentality of checking the four things: the user, the device, the network, the application.
Yep. Excellent. So as we migrate to the cloud, we are inevitably going to be deploying multiple vendor solutions. Adam, how will you stay on the same page? You have AWS, you have Azure, or Google Cloud. Some use the same nomenclature, but it's actually, just because Amazon calls it a VPC, it does something different than Google's VPC. So how are we going to stay on the same page with all of this complexity coming down the road?
That is a great question. That's really, really hard. And it's a challenge that I'm running into right now as we're trying to get more management of the cloud infrastructure. So what the VA did is we kind of cheated, right? So we're using Cisco virtual routers, right? So it's the same iOS that we use on-prem. So all that, you can use the same language, right? The network engineers know how to deal with iOS. They know how to configure. They know how to set up the routes, create the VPNs back to the on-prem network. So it's really the same stack. So we don't need to worry about virtual private gateways or AWS specific VPNs. Use the same technology that you've used for the past 20 years in setting up those networks. And then from the management side, we're abstracting it one layer, right? So we have a tool, it's a cloud manager. So it plugs into AWS, it plugs into Azure. Those are the two that we're using. And you just look at that, and that's your single source of truth. And it says, well, this is a VPC. Well, it has these attributes, but you don't really need to know that it's a VPC. You don't even need to know that it's AWS or Azure. The manager takes care of that by abstracting the cloud one layer away.
Interesting. So I have a follow-up question on that. When you say you're taking your iOS into the cloud, aren't we kind of dragging our problems that we were trying to get away from with us if we do that?
I think this goes back to Dr. Mike's point, right? Or Eric's as well, that it's the people, right? So do you want to train up all your people and have them specialize in AWS, or do you want to be able to use the skills that they already have that they've perfected over the course of many years in setting up their environments?
Yeah, I like this. I think it's a very practical solution to a very real problem, and patient lives are on the line, right? So we have to be serious about the mission. But a cloud enthusiast, a modern college grad who's learned about cloud would look at this and say, wait, you're taking cars and making the interface look like a horse-drawn buggy just because we have guys who know how to drive horse-drawn buggies, right? And I think the mission is serious, and so the need to do this kind of thing is there, right? So I don't mean that as a critique of the approach, Adam, that's been used there, but I do think it's how cloud innovators would see what we're doing, where we're trying to make it practical because of staff, right? Staff are hard to retrain or replace or upskill, right? It's really a major burden to teach people. It's not as easy as driving a car, I guess. I'll undermine my own analogy because I don't mean it to be that as harsh maybe as it sounds. Maybe it's more like trying to go from a small plane to flying a 747, and there are all these knobs and bells and switches, and nobody knows what any of them do. And so we have to give them an interface of the smaller propeller planes they were used to.
Yeah, well, it's also to a single stack. So we're connecting with AWS. We've got the Cisco router. You hit Azure, you've got the Cisco router. You hit on-prem, you've got the Cisco router. It's a single stack. So from a management perspective, especially in an organization as complex as the VA, it's very helpful.
Yeah. And I think, as I say, it's very practical and deals with the serious consideration. In commercial world, outside federal, I run into an awful lot of organizations where the IT part has gone all DevOps, right? Maybe not DevSecOps, but they've adopted DevOps. And so they're going hell for leather into whatever cloud innovations they can. And every team is working independently and doing whatever new cloud thing they want, which means from the security point of view, they're now doing all cloud languages, all full on with every last innovative feature, right? If you can think of a cloud feature, there's someone in your company who's using that. But this means the central security team are trying to keep up with all this, and they're the ones who now need to learn every language all of a sudden, right? It's not too bad for one IT team who've now learned Google has this wonderful new feature in GCP, and so we're going to go use that. They become experts in their one silo. But security, of course, is the big picture discipline where we have to look across all the silos and say, is it safe? Right? We have to worry about everything that can go wrong in a pizza, right? But that means we now have to deal with all of these different teams who make their pizza in different ways. And so again, I'm making a reference for your point, Adam, where you've been able to just stick to one stack, right? I think that there's great insight in doing that. When I see organizations who do not, what they end up with is every team gets wonderful business benefits of innovation and speed and cutting edge and wonderful stuff, right? They give a great customer experience. But from a security point of view, this is a disaster, right? Because they're all running in different directions, using different languages, making their pizza in different ways, and the central security team can't keep up. And so you end up ultimately with a staffing problem, a human knowledge problem. And in a lot of commercial organizations, the DevOps guys say, I don't care, you security guys, go take a class. Not my problem, right? If you don't understand this wacky new stuff that I use, not my issue, right? And
agility and security are really kind of opposite ends of that spectrum, right? You could be really fast and you can have CI/CD. Hey, let's go serverless and let's use all this new technology. But if you want to secure it, it's back to your point, right? You've got to slow things down. You've got to understand the technology. You've got to understand what you're doing, what the interfaces are, how secure it is, who's accessing it, right? Going back to your 4 pillars, what network, what devices. You could be agile, but you sacrifice security, or you can be very secure, but you lose a lot of your agility.
Yeah, it occurs to me there's a small gap sometimes between CI/CD and ADHD. Right?
So, Eric, over there on the DoD side of the house, we know that they've been waiting for a long time to just choose a cloud with the JEDI program that is now gone away. They're coming out with a new initiative to pick a multi-cloud environment. That's pretty challenging. What are you seeing on your side of the house that the DoD is going to try to keep up with all these cloud solutions?
Well, I mean, arguably any customer, one customer to another, any organization, they're going to have different requirements, right? So they're going to ultimately choose the vendor solution or even multiple solutions that offer them the best in terms of security, support, service, scalability, and other things that go along with those services. So as far as staying on the same page with using multiple platforms to accomplish that, I want to almost say it's kind of a fantasy in practice. There are just some things, especially with everybody working remote, collaboration tools may not be as specific or as featured as they need to be in order to get these collaborations going or that information shared from one person to another. So what I've seen, and it's been kind of disparate, is that organizations are bringing in architects, cloud architects, to kind of do this for them. It's somebody who is the point on this migration, whether it's hybrid, a full migration, or even just 1 or 2 services that are migrating. They have an architect in place that is kind of there to scope out that migration, kind of understand where the load balance needs to happen, what kind of service is best to do that, and define those metrics and those priorities as far as moving from legacy to cloud to make sure that services are still maintained. So the architect role, I think, is kind of paramount in organizations implementing this. Education is another one. Adam and Dr. Mike, you guys both touched on this a little bit. Educating people that are already in your organization, of course, that is a great option to do. And of course, it takes time. It takes time in practice. It takes time to upskill those folks. So organizations, while they need to invest in that education to upskill those personnel, it may also be beneficial to invest in somebody or bring on somebody that is an architect to help them with that kind of deployment.
Awesome. Have we launched any of the polls yet?
Yeah, I saw some of the stats come in, and it did seem sort of like Adam and Eric's intro comments that the first poll question about have you migrated to the cloud? We got 60%, almost 2/3 of folks on this webinar are partway done. I think that suggests a lot of people might get that feeling of one foot in each of two boats, which is fine until the boats begin to drift, right?
Yep.
And so that was really interesting. I will say 11% said, "Wish I knew."
That's a little disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, it happens in security, right? But
yeah, so I can, from my perspective, in talking with our intelligence community customers, they have this thing coming along now that for about the last 10, 12 years, they've been using just one cloud, and they've gotten really, really good at that one cloud. It's from AWS. It's called C2S, and it's private just to the intelligence community. And now, as of almost a year ago, last October, they awarded a contract called C2E, which is every cloud vendor is now going to be available to the intelligence community. No longer just AWS. It'll be Azure. It'll be GCP, Google Cloud. It'll be Oracle, and it will be IBM's cloud. And in our discussions with our security teams within these intelligence community customers, I've asked them, I'm like, cool. So what I wrongly assumed that these agencies would go, okay, well, I also want to use Azure, or I also want to use AWS and IBM Cloud. And in speaking with them, that's not the case of how it's going to work. When I said, what are you going to be trying to secure? And they're like, all of them. And so what do you mean by all of them? And they're like, at any point in time, any one of these cloud solutions will be available to our programs, meaning that it will be the program inside of the different various programs inside of the agency. That program may say, program A may say, well, I want to use Google. Program B will say, I want to use Azure. And program C will say, I want to use, whatever. And these poor security teams are like, I guess we have to go take a class. And we're going to need solutions that can help us understand all of these different things, because we just don't have time to secure it. And I mean, they're a year in, and it's here. They are faced with the very real reality of no longer being an expert in the one thing, which was AWS. Now they have to find that expertise or find things to help them quickly become experts in those multiple cloud platforms.
Yeah, and that just take a class, right? It's a nice theory. That is a reaction I hear in organizations, but there is not one class in being multilingual, right? You can't take a multilinguistics class. You have to learn French and German, right? And then it's two separate classes from two different professors, right? And the same thing is true in cloud, right? For the problem you're articulating, Wayne, right? If you just had one standard language, just like Adam was talking about, having that one standard stack, we were able to do that in legacy networks by just being strict about the routers and firewalls are bought by this team over here, and their decision goes for everybody. And that doesn't happen in cloud anymore, right? And so from a high executive level, you might think, oh, Google sells me one thing, Azure tries to sell me the same thing, and they're basically the same, right? You ask your technical people, could we do in Google what we do in Azure? And they'll say, mostly yes. There's some squirrely technical bits, but they're all different languages, right? And I think the analogy to human language is an important one, right? That all of these clouds invent the idea of you'll have a little bit of infrastructure that's yours for one team, and they all have that idea, but they all give it different names, right? In Azure, it's called a VNet. In Amazon, it's called a VPC, right? And they all have slightly different rules about, now when you define a subnet, does that get a network access list or does it get a security group, right? And they're not just different names, they are actually subtly different in the rules and how they work. and there are different kinds of mistakes you can make. So it really is close to saying, a country with one language, like America, where we all speak, one official English and we do all our government documents in English, that simplifies the problem. There are countries in this world who have 4 official languages and they have to translate everything into 4 different languages. Do you think those people make more mistakes in their paperwork? Why, yes, they do. Right. And so when you're thinking about, these intel agencies, each team might only need to go and learn one language, then they're going to do everything they do in Greek. But the security team, just like you're saying, right, they now need to be expert in all of these languages. And the sad truth is they are all different, right? It's not, you can just exchange and say, okay, well, I used to do this stuff in Amazon and I'll just flip it and I'll do it in Azure instead. It doesn't work that way. The names are all different, and just like trying to translate poetry, right? The subtle nuances are different one language to another. You can't just say, if I just replace all the words with the dictionary word that's equivalent, then I'll get the right answer. Well, no, try doing that with Shakespeare. It doesn't work so well.
Yeah. Historically, there's been lots of turnover in the government. And DoD, I would say specifically, it's almost mandatory for the military personnel, not the civilian people necessarily, but you can pretty much guarantee in 2 to 4 years the person that you were working with is gonna be gone. And given the specialized knowledge for each of these cloud environments, Eric, what do you think the plan is to handle the inevitable turnover and skill sets so that you can maintain the continuity and ensure your security posture?
Yeah, for sure. In some ways, turnover can be good. In some ways, it can be bad because you get personnel that have been in a job for X number of years, right? And they're kind of set in their ways and things have become comfortable and stuff like that. I'm sure we're all guilty of it. And knowing these systems and platforms, getting into that mindset of zero trust is kind of like a process of buy-in. There needs to be some buy-in at some level. So when you can prove something works in a proof of concept, or it has some sort of strategic advantage, or it even simplifies old processes that were in place before, people are a lot more willing to adapt and start working in that direction. But in terms of security, I know a lot of the major cloud providers, they offer significant tooling or resources, whatever they want to call it, to help kind of build and maintain that secure system. Most, if not all, will alert whenever there's some sort of insecure configuration or there's been some sort of design flaw or something that is just inherently wrong with the migration. And another area I think we can continue and ensure that secure mechanisms stay in place is implementing a level of automation. Just verifying that those security mechanisms that have been implemented, they stay there, they stay configured appropriately, they stay maintained through automation. I mean, this is even more relevant, especially with security, because if you can normalize a security structure and apply some sort of automation to that and keeping that human element out of it where possible, those turnovers and skill sets will not be as detrimental whenever that happens.
That makes a good sense. And just as a side note, one of my engineers was leaving one of the intelligence community agencies buildings, and Microsoft is building a SCIF in that area, and they literally have a sign outside of the exit or entrance that says, "Cleared, want a job, come work for Microsoft."
Hoovering people up as they walk down the street.
I've seen those signs. Yeah, absolutely.
So they're even the cloud providers are poaching the people. Adam, anything?
Mostly, I just want to echo what Eric said. I think automation, specifically around like infrastructure as code, is a great way to be able to preserve setups and deployments as that turnover happens. Although, I mean, you look at the government, it's not so much more turnover, I would say, than private sector. You look at private sector, and like maybe every 5 years on average, someone's going to get a new job. Well, that happens in government too. The issue is it's a contract expires and everyone leaves at the same time. And that's where the real challenge happens. And I mean, it's the federal employees that have to pick up a lot of slack when that happens to train the new contractors as they come in if the new contractor isn't able to maintain or get the staff. Because the unfortunate fact is sometimes the new contractor wins because they undercut the old guy. They offer the same job to the same people for a 20% pay cut because that's what they need to do to make their margins, and they're not going to maintain all that staff.
Right.
Yeah, that's excellent. In fact, this automation topic could be the entire hour in itself, right? It's a great topic. I'd want to encourage the audience where we do have a chat or a questions feature. So if you have any questions about automation or anything else we're talking about, but I think automation might be something where people have questions about what your experiences have been like and what we can do. So I do want to remind the audience that we're interested in any questions you have. You should find a tool on your screen where you can ask attendee questions and you can just fire away. Automation is a really good one. And I think it's important that both of you brought out the significance of that, because personnel turnover and the need to check all of these different disciplines, right? Eric, you had the point earlier about, when you're doing these rollouts, having an architect who's really skilled. That's a great idea, but how do you get the rest of the team to understand what the guru is saying, right? That also proves to be a challenge. So we mean this very much as an open-ended conversation around these lessons from large migrations. But I inevitably, sort of like Wayne, I want to tell a Red Seal story here for a second. I don't want to pitch my product, but what we do at Red Seal is we help map out all the interactions, right? We pull in all of those 4 things I was talking about earlier. We pull in all this information about what the infrastructure looks like and then show it to people. And we always, I'll personalize it. I always thought about that as this is an advanced analyst's tool, because you finally get an ability to see your world, see your network environment and test it with questions like, did I connect the guest Wi-Fi in the hospital into the surgical machines, right? So it's meant as an analytics world that gives you this view of the network that you can interact with and ask it all these questions about where your defensive gaps are. But one thing that really surprised me, which I think is on theme of what you were both saying, is I had customers tell me, I look at Red Seal as a great onboarding tool. And I thought, what? Right? That's the opposite of what I think about my own technology. Right, I think of it as this advanced analyst's capability to be able to do the sort of minority reports, Iron Man spinning 3D visualization thing about a network. Onboarding tool, what's that about? And come to find out, the fact that we were capturing the tribal knowledge about, this part of the network is for this, that part over there, that's where those missions are done, right? All of that information gets put in by the expert. And what I find is there are organizations who take new hires into a network security team and say, your first job is going to be to sit in front of Red Seal for a while. Why? Because they're the world's best breakthrough analyst? No, because it gives them a grounding in what the organization looks like. Right? Never underestimate the value of a good map, right? Ask any military leader about the value of a good map. Right? So just getting the troops to understand the basics of the terrain. As I say, I don't mean this as a pitch on the product. To me, it was kind of humbling in a way to realize that what I'd thought of as this advanced analytics tool, some of my customers were saying, yeah, sure, that's nice. But what I really use it for is dealing with the turnover, dealing with the fact that I have new people coming in and they don't know the environment. And so I teach them the environment by sticking them in front of Red Seal.
Yeah. No, that's good. So clearly the government believes that migrating the cloud is critical. Migrating the cloud is critical to security. Do you believe that cloud will make your lives easier, harder, or have little impact? And in light of the fact that Gartner believes that through the year 2023, 99% of cloud security failures will be the customer's fault, do you have concerns?
Yeah, and in fact, I want to jump in there. We asked a second poll, and that was on this point, and we got answers. And I'm surprised at the audience response, right? So 93.8% of people picked the same answer on the question, is cloud good or bad for security, which is the point you're on Wayne.
Yep.
Which one was it? Good in theory if we do it right. So there we go, right? So everybody in the audience, almost to a person, one person says, yes, I love it. But the vast majority of people pick the same answer of, yeah, it's good in theory if you do it right. And now I bounce that stat, which, so thank you to the audience for responding to the poll. That was surprising and good feedback. But that idea of, yes, it's good if you do it right. And then we've got Gartner saying 99% of problems in their forecast of what's going to be happening in Cloud Fabric, 99% of the problems are the organization's own fault.
Right. Well,
that makes it a mighty big if in that thing of good in theory if we do it right.
exactly. So, Eric, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, kind of just to reinforce, yeah, if we do it right, as everybody knows, there's different terminologies used across these different platforms. So getting everything to migrate simply, getting everybody on the same page is going to be a challenge. Doing it right, I think, is kind of a loose term, because I don't think any two organizations are going to do it the same way. So doing it right, I think, is kind of subjective as it comes from the organizational view. So for organizations that deal with, I'd say, sensitive data or information, or even information that is classified, those pitfalls may be exaggerated or even more apparent as that transition happens, because just you're dealing with the sensitivity of data. Even in Adam's case, personal data that would be used at hospitals. I mean, all that stuff has to be, that PII has to be guarded very closely. But kind of to the deeper point that Gartner is making on the failure is going to be on the customer, I can say that he's almost certainly right, because these providers have designed these platforms and services to work in a way that leaves very little room for fault tolerance between them or among them. So utilizing best practices where necessary, I think, is going to be paramount. In some cases, those are going to be required based on the client that you're working for, or the organization that you're part of. Those best practices are going to have to be implemented. And if those best practices are followed, how are you going to measure the success? How are you going to measure the success of a deployment from legacy to cloud, or even a hybrid model? And who defines those best practices and says that we've kind of reached this point of finality?
Yep. Adam?
So I want to go back a little bit to kind of where I started with the whole concept of SaaS as cloud. I think Gartner is probably correct if you treat the cloud like AWS or Azure, where it's just someone else's data center, because they do have those controls and they do let you know when you have something misconfigured. But we're kind of in the wild west of shadow IT right now with all of these SaaS providers. Anyone with a credit card can sign up with their company email for some fly-by-night SaaS provider, right? You've got like Wix and WordPress are common, that you don't need to be a developer anymore to build a website and deploy it. People are now starting up SaaS as a service companies, so you can build your own micro SaaS in a day or two and start selling it to people. And I don't think there's any governance on there. I think those are really easy targets for breaches that won't be the customer. Well, maybe it's the customer's fault for letting some Joe Blow employee sign up and move their data to an unvetted SaaS provider. But like the shadow IT implications of this are very large. And I don't know, honestly, I don't know what the best way is to handle that.
Shadow IT could be another hour in itself. I've run into folks who advance the position now that shadow IT is the way we used to think of a problem, and that in the cloud, no, the standard normal operating procedure of the cloud is shadow IT.
Right.
Right. Any clown with a credit card can buy a new VPC, right? And if you don't want that to happen, you're going to have to do some serious procedural controls to stop people doing it. So cloud is almost invented on a bedrock of shadow IT being normalized. But that could be the start of a whole other hour.
Right. Well, speaking of a whole nother hour, we're coming into the last few minutes of this. Do we want to see if we have any questions?
Yes, it looks like we have a couple in the hopper. And as a quick reminder, just use that ask a question button on your webinar console. The first one kind of goes back to the point you guys have been discussing, the big, if we deploy cloud right, we will have more security, more benefits. Do you guys have advice about, are there certifications or training that government organizations or other entities can turn to help them reduce cloud mistakes?
Mm-hmm. if anybody, Adam or Eric, if you have any particular certifications you've seen people get that you think are effective, that's good. Of course, each one of the cloud providers offers a certification in their language. You can get a master's degree in German and a master's degree in Finnish and a master's degree in Greek from each of the cloud providers. And sometimes in security, the goal has to be across the team, we're going to have to tick each one of those boxes. Get AWS certified, get Azure certified, get at least somebody. You're never going to find and retain somebody who is certified in all of them, right? Wayne, your point about the Microsoft Hoover on the street trying to suck in people to their skiff. They will take people with those with one of those certifications, let alone all of them, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it has to come down to something like across a broad team. You want to make sure you have two people with each of the vendor certifications because you're going to lose one of them before the ink's dry on the contract.
Redundancy.
Yeah, a little bit of redundancy. But Eric or Adam, any other advice or how you would approach it than just get two of each of all the languages?
Yeah. I mean, what I've seen with some of the vendor type trainings, if you want to learn that platform, you go to the source, right? You go to the vendor to get the best information. There are also those ad hoc informational sessions that may be just like very broad as in terms of cloud, how it works, very, very basic, very shallow, things like that you can find on like Udemy or Degreed. There's a bunch of courses available on Coursera too. I'm sure everybody's heard of Coursera. But yeah, I think really the best certification is to go to the vendor directly. I mean, if you want to learn that system and you want to learn it in its most wholesome manner, you need to go to that vendor's training.
Yeah. Spot on.
All right, looks like we have another one. This kind of ties back to the zero trust part of the discussion that you guys had, and how Dr. Mike kind of talked about the 4 parts of zero trust is user authentication, looking at trusted devices, how connect your network, and then applications. The question is, what's best? You talked about how the tendency is for organizations to go after the first area of those 4 that they're most comfortable with. The question is, my IT colleagues tell me zero trust just means upgrade how people log in. They're clearly going after that, user authentication piece that's maybe easier. Why does it have to be more complicated than that? And what advice do you have for organizations who, they're very comfortable with user authentication capabilities, how do they balance out the other 3 that are very necessary?
Yeah, it takes a broad view. Now, Wayne, I'm going to toss this one, I think, to you. That there was the draft guidance that you'd encountered that I think we thought about as maybe a follow-up item that people from this call might appreciate getting a review of. So do you want to talk a little bit about the background of that document, and we're going to unpack a little what it says on exactly this question? Oh, you're muted, Wayne.
Thank you. The OMB sent out a draft probably about 2-3 weeks ago called "Moving the U.S. Government Towards Zero Trust Cybersecurity Principles." And you made a comment about that. You noticed, Dr. Mike, you said it says moving. It's not reaching those zero trust cybersecurity principles. So
it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not life, liberty, and happiness.
Right. Exactly.
It's a journey.
And ironically, it covers the 4 of the topics that you talked about earlier, which is identity, devices, networks, applications, and then the data. What is the data? And a couple of the things that I really think get overlooked, because when people talk about zero trust, they're like, we're supposed to not trust the network anymore, and we're going to do everything at layer 7, and we're going to authenticate. Everything's going to be there, but at some point you have to be able to get there. And in the draft, they talk about segmenting your networks around your applications. So I think that's very beneficial in the cloud, because you could do that micro segmentation in the cloud. Right. And then assume that all of your applications, so this is number 3 was networks, number 4 was applications. Assume that regardless of what you think or what assume that your applications are exposed to the internet. And the to be able to do that, I think you are going to need some sort of automation, because number 3 requires them to have, them being the various agencies, requires them to have a plan on that network segmentation. So first off, you're going to have to figure out, well, what applications do you have? Where are they? Because zero trust isn't just cloud. There, as we've learned today, there are going to be many agencies that cannot move aspects of their network to the cloud. So where is your application, on premise or in the cloud? How am I going to segment around that application? So you need to come up with a plan. And then lastly, it's that continuous monitoring aspect of that segmentation. Just because you implement, I think it was Adam may have said it earlier, just because you've implemented it today, is it still going to be that way tomorrow? Is it still going to be that way a month later? So this is where the automation aspect comes in that we talked about earlier. Organizations are going to have some sort of automation to continuously monitor all of these wonderful things that zero trust and cloud are supposed to give us. It's really just, nothing is really changing except the speed of what is changing.
Yeah, you nailed the point there. I know we're running right to the end of the hour now, but you said in there about, don't trust the network anymore. Yeah, that was a great point, right? That supported your whole argument here, that when people hear about zero trust, they get into this misapprehension about, oh, it's just about better login, because we're told don't trust the network anymore. That was the old medieval castle model. People translate don't trust the network anymore into forget the network. And that's the deep error. That's the big mistake people make in zero trust. Right. And I think you hit that point very, very well here, right? That it's not forget the network. It's not we can't rely on the castle wall anymore. It's walls everywhere. Yeah. Right? Just the way a modern city is, right? And so once it's walls everywhere, you don't solve this problem with sweat equity. You have to turn to automation to be able to check that you now have all the walls. It used to be easy. You could check whether you had castle walls by walking around it one time and seeing if there are any holes. Right? Can't do that when it's walls everywhere instead of just one big thick wall at the edge of the castle. So I should keep it short to that, but I think you really nailed a point there about, yes, zero trust means don't trust the network, but don't turn that into forget the network. And that OMB draft is very clear on this, right? You must segment, and that's easier in cloud. It's not forget about the network.
Right. Well, we're at the top of the hour. I really appreciate Adam and Eric's time, and I guess I'll turn it back over.
Right. Thanks, Wayne. And thanks to all of you for submitting your questions. For any that went unanswered, Red Seal will follow up with you directly offline. Don't forget to check the resources tab to download more information about Red Seal. Check out their website, redseal.net. Thank you to our amazing panel, Wayne, Dr. Mike, Adam, and Eric, for speaking with us today. We clearly could have done a whole nother hour on automation and other principles. But thank you to all of you for joining us, and you can continue to link to the archive version of this webinar, see previous Signal webinars on AFCEA's Signal Magazine website, which is www.afcea.org/signal/webinar. And this concludes our webinar. Thank you and have a good day.